Today we're talking about a pretty cool topic, which is the hierarchy of strength. So this goes with our program design creation. Last week we talked about some more theoretical aspects of program design, including where we should be, whether someone's going to be closer to their minimal essential strain or their maximal recoverable volume, and how we would set up programs based on that. And then of course some of the fundamental fitness philosophies, theories, fundamental principles that we have to know for program design. Today we're talking about the hierarchy of strength and the transfer of skill. So the hierarchy of strength is essentially a system or a way of ranking what's important to an athlete, particularly a powerlifter, when it comes to being strong. And the way hopefully you can see, this is set up as like a pyramid, and so you have your base, which is kind of what your fundamental stuff is, and that's the most important, and then we're going to go up, and as we get up it's less important. So the goal is not to strive up to there, the goal is to spend most of your time all in this area right here. So the very first thing is physical wellness. Right? You can't win a powerlifting competition if you're sitting on the sides, if you're sitting on the bench with a hurt knee or super sick or something like that. So you do want to maintain physical wellness. I have an article called The Wheel of Wellness, which talks about dividing fitness up into kind of health, fitness, and performance, those kind of three centers. But health is the center, the hub of the wheel. And, you know, as a personal trainer, I want my athletes, I want my powerlifters to at least pay some attention to health. Now, admittedly, some powerlifters are willing to sacrifice a little bit of health by either carrying around some extra weight or maybe just really willing to kind of smash themselves, for that short-term gain. That's kind of, on them. But I want my programming to keep somebody safe and healthy, so we're going to have to address different weak points. Can't just do the big three all by themselves. You need a variety of different exercises to keep someone overall fit and healthy. So this is where the concept of like muscle balance comes in, basic structure, good program design. We can't have horrible tendinitis, decent form so we can lift for the long term, things like that. So we need to have this, you can't forget this. And that's why, unfortunately, obviously sometimes the strongest powerlifters are pretty fat, to be blunt. But that message of strength, I think, is lost a lot when someone's carrying around 100 pounds of excess body fat. So we could be strong, but we want to kind of trim. Again, each person has to make their individual decision, but just be aware if you're carrying around a massive amount of extra weight, that can impact your wellness either now or certainly at some point later. All right, next thing is adherence. Are you following the program that you or your coach or whoever has set for you? Okay, I can write somebody the greatest program in the world, but if they don't do it, it's not going to work. Okay, and a really crappy program that is at least followed regularly is likely to be more successful. So just like with diet, you've got to get in and do what you're supposed to do on diet. When it comes to working out and building strength, you just have to be consistent. Right? Strength is a game for people that are looking for consistent. I don't want someone to come and be like, hey, how strong can I get in 2 months? I want someone to be like, hey, how strong can I get in 3 years? 8 years, right? 15 years. How strong can we get? Freaking super strong if you're willing to work and you stay healthy. Coupled with adherence is effort. You have to be willing to try hard. It's one of the things I love about powerlifting is it's a test of one's constitution, of one's will, your discipline, right? It's gonna, sometimes that weight kind of hits you in the face, literally or figuratively. And so you got to be willing to kind of fight through that. To quote good old Arnold here, right? You got to have the guts to say, I don't care what happens, I'm just going to go through, and if I fall down, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's all worth it. So you've got to be able to kind of turn on yourself and just go through and be willing to suffer. And that's why not everybody's cut out to be a powerlifter, right? That's just the way it is. So, and to me, that's that exclusivity that is kind of cool. Now, it doesn't mean that powerlifters are, the greatest warriors of all time. I'm not arguing that. But you have to be able to put in some effort, and a lot of people simply aren't willing to put in that effort. And again, I can give you an awesome program, but if you barely try on it and you're not willing to push yourself, you don't cross that minimal essential strain, everything else can be perfect. Perfect number of reps, and your form is great on squat. But if you've been squatting 95 pounds for the last 5 years, it ain't going to work. Okay? So effort is key. And these huge. Okay, huge. All right, now we get to the thing that the personal trainer or the coach likely has the most direct control over, which is exercise selection. You have got to pick the right exercises to get someone ready for that competition or ready to build their strength. Right? Just think about it. If you came to me, hired me as your powerlifting coach, and I said, okay, we're going to do, the only exercises you're going to do are going to be leg extensions, Smith machine squats, and rotary calf raise. Okay, that's all we're going to do to prepare. Okay, again, if things are laid out perfectly and I have all the physiology and all that kind of stuff, but I don't have the right exercise selection, you're screwed. You are not going to perform well. So exercise selection is huge. We're going to continue to talk about that in a second. Now, occasionally, sometimes people get a little slack or give me, a little kind of disbelief, no pun intended, that this is as high ranking as it is. But I firmly believe that you have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that you can do it, and your body then, basically, I like to say, the body does what the brain tells it to do. So if you're telling yourself, I'm getting stronger, I'm going to do this, I will lift this weight. When I interviewed, one of my favorite things about doing my the All About Powerlifting book was I got to interview some of the best lifters in the world. People like Kurt Karwoski, Jennifer Thompson, Vince Anello, Wade Hooper, and I've certainly talked with other super awesome powerlifters as well. And it wasn't that they all had this, everybody trained, twice a week with 5 sets of 5, and that's the key to strength. They believed they could do it. They believed they were going to get stronger, and they had that kind of undying, unyielding belief, and it kind of continued. Just to share a little example, I'm not at the level of those athletes, but for myself, I thought for sure I was going to bench press 400 when I was 19. I was doing 300, and I was like, oh yeah, 400. I mean, yeah, of course I'm going to bench that. 15 years later, I was stuck at 350, and I had really lost that belief. And so I had to kind of change my programming, I had to kind of change my whole approach, and then all of a sudden, once my bench started going up again, I started to believe, yes, now it can actually happen, and that's a super positive thing that feeds in on itself. So you have to believe that you can do this. And to take a little segue, I think this is one of the most powerful things that a coach or a trainer can instill is that belief in another person. Let's just take weight loss. Someone comes in, I've tried every diet, I've done this, I can't lose weight. Okay, they have stopped believing what they can do will work, but they do have hopefully some trust and faith in an external source, i.e. you, and so they say, okay, well, you tell me what to do. If you give them a decent plan in the first couple of weeks, they start to lose weight, all of a sudden that belief comes in, and then now that's empowering, now that's motivation, and then they try harder, and then they see even better results, and suddenly it happens. So I believe a big role of a coach is to give their athletes that belief in themselves. Now, it's not fake. I don't want to fake it. Some kid comes to me and says, I want to deadlift 2,000 pounds. You're probably never going to be able to do that. But if I look at someone, I was just working with a lady the other day, and she's like, oh, I've always wanted to squat 185. And I was like, you just destroyed 150, and you've barely been trained. And I was like, we'll get you to squat 185, no problem. And all of a sudden her eyes kind of go, and it's like, oh, wow, this coach believes that I can do that. Okay, so when you instill that belief, I can't tell you how powerful that is. Let's look at all the other athletes. Think of, what do you think Tom Brady's thinking when he's playing the Super Bowl? Do you think he's, I believe we can do it? The Patriots have that kind of belief. Great athletes have, I will be able to do it. Doesn't mean they do it 100% of the time, but they believe they can. Once you think you're done, you're done. So you have to try to approach it. And it's easier said than done. I'm not saying I have mastered this, but you have to try to believe in yourself, and then you have to instill that belief in others. Now we get to what most people think should be down here. Okay, and people spend tons of time debating this kind of stuff, and I certainly think it's fascinating, interesting to learn about, but I do think it needs to be put in its place. This is kind of what I call the nuts and bolts of your program, which is how many sets are you doing, how many reps are you doing, how long are you resting, what kind of intensity are you training at. Okay? It's certainly important, but it's not the end-all, be-all of what happens. There's not that much difference. If you take somebody and have an athlete and they do, 8 or 10 reps at 75% of their 1 rep max, and then somebody else does 5 reps at 85% of the 1 rep max, it's basically the same. It doesn't change that much. Okay, so this is not that crucial, and it sure as shit is not as important as exercise selection. Okay, you can have all the right reps and all the right intensity on the wrong exercise, and you're not going to get the results that you want. And you can have somebody squatting who only trains for powerlifting competition by doing sets of 20 on squats, which would be pretty rare. But if they walk in and they've been doing nothing but hard-ass sets of 20 that they've been consistent with, I'm not saying that's the ideal way to train, but they'll still probably do pretty good as long as they're not totally inane when they pick their numbers. Okay, so this stuff is important, right? And we certainly want to study it and we want to focus on it, but it's not the most important thing. Just getting in, trying hard, and being consistent is a lot more important than this. Okay, then your weekly routine. What I mean by this is what we often call the split or your setup. So people often debate, well, should I do like chest and back this week? Should I do push? Should I do pull? When am I going to put shoulders? How do I kind of construct these things together? And as long as you have a weekly routine that facilitates some level of recovery, it doesn't matter that much whether you do, your squats twice a week on a leg day, or whether you just do squat and then a bench and this and that. Now, obviously, it does matter some. I'm not saying it has no impact at all. But I didn't go to a competition and lose to someone and be like, oh, you're squatting on Thursday, I'm squatting on Tuesday. Of course, that's why you won. What an idiot. Right? It's more the total amount of work and all this other stuff in here that has a bigger impact. But routine can matter, and especially if you set it up wrong. So for example, if you set up, well, I'm going to squat on Monday, then I'm going to deadlift on Tuesday, then I'm going to squat on Thursday, then I'm going to deadlift on Friday, and you do that for a long period of time, your lower back is now working 4 days in a row. And if you're pretty strong, that's going to be a lot of impact on you. That can really screw up your recovery. So your weekly routine can kind of limit you, but it's probably not going to propel you to that next level. Okay, then we get to nutrition. Okay, first I should just say this is assuming that someone isn't like, in some prisoner of war starving themselves. Obviously, if it was literally you get 0 calories, then that would be up there. But this is someone has a kind of just normal, food, they have access to food, they kind of eat what they want, versus, okay, now I'm really going to eat all the right foods, I'm going to do all the right stuff. If you look at a lot of powerlifters, I mean, just to be blunt, nutrition in the short term and in the performance for that isn't that crucial. As long as they have enough fuel, powerlifters can fuel themselves on fast food and on things like that. Now, if we go down here to physical wellness, I'm not encouraging that behavior either excessively at the moment, or I'm not saying it has no long-term consequences. But if you just took someone who has 3 months to get ready for a meet, and you're going to have to pick on one of these things, it's a lot more important to pick the right exercises than it is that they have the exact right percent of the macros, or that they eat only organic foods. So it's on there. I'm not saying we don't pay any attention to it all, but it's not a huge thing to factor in. Then next up is recovery modalities. These are things like using a foam roller, using a Theragun, right? Seeing your chiro. I mean, those things are important, right? But keep in mind, there's a lot of fads that come and go. Nobody was foam rolling 40 years ago, and there were people strong as shit. It's not going to surprise me if in 40 years from now, foam rollers are essentially, hard to find. Now the newest thing is those like Theraguns, those massage things. I mean, sure, obviously, if you've got bad tendonitis and you get in there and that can feel pretty good, okay. But I think the amount of time and money that people spend, I got to go to my chiropractor, XYZ. Look, I've had a few injuries, and I felt like a chiropractor definitely helped, and there was one time I thought that he really probably did make a pretty big difference, although again, how much of that is belief in myself, that those two get mixed in there. But the idea that I got to spend $100 a week to go to a chiropractor twice a week to get adjustments, and there's no way I could follow a routine without that, that's just BS. You'd be so much more, just focus on keeping yourself healthy, learning good form, and then trying hard and just keep lifting. Okay, you don't have to have all these extra fancy stuff in there. And a lot of times people fool themselves in thinking that's either necessary or super crucial, and it's not. And it can be super costly time and money. So it's not a big deal. It's a variable. It's something to consider, but it's certainly one of the last things I look at instead of one of the first things I look at. And then way up here is supplements. Okay, so is somebody, creatine has the greatest impact, and creatine maybe has a 2 to 3% change, right? So that means you bench 200, maybe now you bench 204, 206. So it has something in there, and assuming you have decent nutrition, you're probably getting somewhat adequate creatine anyway. And then all your other supplements, there's not a lot of evidence that's in support of supplements, and so there's probably a decent amount of placebo effect going on in there, which is also goes back to that belief in yourself. But that's certainly not your first thing to turn. My bench isn't going up, but what supplements are you taking? No, your bench isn't going up. Well, are your shoulders healthy? How regular have you been working out? What kind of effort have you been putting in, and what exercises are you doing? Those are the things that are going to fix your bench. Not even whether you're doing sets of 5 or sets of 8. Okay, this stuff right here with some focus on this, and then a little bit of attention there. Okay, so make sure as a coach that right in here, This is what you're focused on, and 90% of your effort goes there. Because otherwise, you're just kind of, you're scratching at the little tippy top, barely making a dent if you're not focused on that. So this is the hierarchy of strength. Now, what's not on here, but I occasionally get questions about is, well, where do drugs fall and where do genetics fall? Well, first, I'm not an expert on drugs. I've never taken any sort of performance-enhancing drug, and I'm not an expert on genetics. But I do observe people. I do try to be a relatively keen observer of the things that influence strength. So I will share with you my opinion. You can take it or leave it. Okay? If I had to put drugs on one side, I would put drugs somewhere over here. Okay? Generally, most people think that steroids make about a 10% difference in strength with a range of 5 to 20%. 10% may not seem like a lot, but it's a pretty big deal, right? I deadlifted 700 pounds. Who knows for sure, but if I took steroids, I might deadlift 770. Well, it's a pretty big difference between 700 and 770. And so in most sports at an elite level, 10% is often the difference between first place and fifth place. So in strength sports, it definitely makes a pretty big difference. I like to think of exercise selection. So let's just do a quick, simple either-or kind of thing. So you have someone who has a choice. Again, ready for a powerlifting competition. They can lift, but they can only do kind of shitty exercises, like they can only do like a leg press and Smith machine, let's say train like a bodybuilder, and they can take steroids. And then you have someone else, right, a similar person who is not taking steroids but can train with the right exercises. They can do squats, they can do deads, things like that. Who's going to win? I'm going to argue that even though that person's taking steroids, they are not going to be skilled enough, they're not going to have enough practice to come in and squat a whole bunch of weight. Right, my money is on the person who's been squatting for 6 months hard as heck versus just a person who's juicing and then also lifts relatively heavy without doing it. Now, of course, in real life, the athletes can do both, but that to me, that helps prioritize that exercise selection is more powerful than steroids. However, steroids may well, one, it probably improves that belief in yourself. Obviously, it's not all placebo. And it's probably more important than things like your sets, your reps, okay, what you're doing with your program, your setup, all that stuff. So it is pretty important. And again, we use that range of kind of 5 to 20%. 20% is ginormous, 5% is still, impactful. And then genetics. Well, where does genetics fall? Okay, clearly not everyone can be as strong as Ray Williams. That's pretty much a guarantee. If you don't believe in that, then you just need to kind of recheck your facts. Having said that, it is true that you don't know what your genetic potential is unless you spend your life trying to find it. Jennifer Thompson gives a great quote in here, which the first time she benched, or early on in her bench, lifting, she was lifting 65 pounds, right? Which is kind of a normal, female getting ready to go bench press. There's certainly nothing remarkable about that. And she thought a set of 5 was heavy. And now she's going on to bench 315. So it's not like she just walked up to the bar, did 225, and was some sort of phenom and goes from there. That's true for a lot of people. Kurt Karwoski was telling me, the first time he was squatting 3 plates, he was a little intimidated by it. And then he went on to squat 1,000 pounds. So you don't just start off crazy strong, and it does take a lot of work. But some people certainly naturally can get much stronger than others due to their joints, their bones, the way their body's set up. A lot of this effort and adherence and exercise selection is pretty damn important too. So don't forget about that. Again, I would say genetics is not as important as exercise selection. Who walking around the street, maybe they play football, maybe they do some lifting, but if they are not allowed to squat or they don't squat with any regularity, and then they come against someone who is squatting with a lot of frequency, are they going to out-squat that person? No. Okay, almost never. So genetics is important for sure, but exercise selection is really crucial. But genetics is, you're not going to be able to just, I foam roll and you don't, so I'm probably going to be able to out-total you even though you take to this naturally, right? So genetics, once again, on this side, is probably somewhere kind of in this range, right? So certainly important, but not an end-all, be-all. No one's just walking around with the ability to squat 700 pounds, I don't believe. They have to train and train and train and be consistent until they can learn, because strength, especially the way we express it, strength is a skill, and you have to learn how to express that skill, and it takes a lot of practice. So that's your hierarchy of strengths. So the point behind this is to use this to invest your time, energy, and effort wisely, both as a lifter and then as an athlete and a coach. Now, we want to talk about this idea of the transfer of skill. Okay, the transfer of skill means that if you build up skill in one area or activity, We're interested, does it transfer over to something else? So does getting good at one thing make you good at something else? Okay? And particularly in this instance, if we're talking about fitness, we're talking about an exercise. So the question is, if I get good at one exercise, does it help me perform another exercise? Okay, that's what we're interested in. Generally, those exercises with higher skill, so exercises that are high on the skill level, the skill requirement, tend to require more coordination, so more balance, more coordination. They tend to be compound exercises versus single joint. So most people would say it takes more skill to do a bench press than a fly. Okay? It takes more skill to do a bench press than a chest press machine. Okay? They tend to occur in real space, meaning they don't necessarily always move in 3 dimensions, but they have the ability to do that. A bench press bar can go over your face, it can go over your belly button, it can twist like a helicopter. In an ideal world, it moves up and down, okay, just in the transverse plane, but it is allowed to move in the other ones. The machines can't. You can go push up on a chest press machine as much as you want. It only goes forwards and backwards. Okay? And also, it's definitely worth mentioning that an exercise that involves more weight involves more skill. I was at a personal training seminar kind of early on in my career. Someone was like, what's more skill, a lunge or a leg press? And, the first response was, well, a lunge. And there's some truth to that. There's some balance. There's coordination. You have to kind of watch yourself when you're doing that. Okay, but let's compare and contrast weight. Yeah, a body weight lunge to a no weight leg press. I'll probably give the nod to a lunge on skill. But what about a body weight lunge compared to a 500-pound leg press? It takes a lot more skill to lift that 500 pounds than it does just to do your own body weight. So weight has a big impact in skill. This is also why, a little side note, why generally barbells trump dumbbells, because the total weight lifted is more impressive. All right, if someone can bench 400 pounds, you do not just chop that in half and give them a 200-pound dumbbell and a 200-pound dumbbell and see what they can do. Right? If you ever spend any time lifting, you realize on dumbbells you're going to use less than what you would do in the vast majority of exercises compared to a bar. This is why almost every strength competition contests a bar, such as Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting. Could have done a dumbbell press, could have done a dumbbell squat. You can do a dumbbell clean and jerk if you want, okay, but it's much better tested by a bar, greater weight, greater skill. So one of the sayings I would like you to remember at the end of today is the transfer of skill flows downhill. You probably have heard of like shit rolls downhill. Well, guess what? When it comes to lifting, the transfer of skill flows downhill. Well, what the hell does that mean? What that means is that if you have a high skill exercise, then getting better at that exercise will then flow down and improve a low skill exercise. I've been talking about the bench press and a chest press, okay, machine. So if you are good at a bench press, let's say you have someone who can bench press 315, nice, classic, good, strong number. Okay, not necessarily going to win every competition, but pretty good. Okay, so you got someone who can bench press 315. They go to a new gym. They walk over to a chest press machine that they've never seen before. Are they going to be any good at that chest press machine, say, compared to just some random person who's never worked out? They're going to dominate the chest press machine. They may take them a couple of reps and a few adjustments just to get the seat right or whatever. They're going to be able to do great on the chest press machine because a chest press machine is low skill compared to high skill. So the transfer, the development that they learned during the bench press transferred to that lower skill activity. So it flows downhill. Now it's definitely worth mentioning that the transfer of that lifting weights, right, is not the highest skill activity in the world. Okay? Lifting weights is awesome, but as I say in the Powerlifting book, right, it's not so much that, can you bench, it's how much can you bench, because really anybody can bench. Give somebody a PVC pipe, right, you can have a 5-year-old bench pretty well, or an 80-year-old, okay? So it's how much can you bench. There are things out there that require a lot more skill, things like, for example, gymnastics and figure skating and stuff like that. They have a high transfer of skill. It's also worth noting that gymnasts in particular tend to have really nice bench presses even without practicing the bench a lot, because what they do on the rings and the bodyweight exercises and really challenge position will have positive transfer over to the bench press. So they don't have to spend a huge amount of time benching, and they'll often come in and have a pretty good bench press. A lot of male gymnasts can bench double their body weight without that much training. Okay, that's pretty impressive. Now, when it comes to the transfer of skill, we can have that skill flow in a couple different directions. All right? One is what's called a two-way street. So think of a car, right, driving. Two-way street means it's going to flow in both directions. And we can have a strong two-way street or an easy flow, which means that one exercise directly improves another. A good example of this is probably an incline press and a bench press. When your bench goes up, you can now incline a reasonable amount. So you take someone who can bench 400 pounds, their incline is going to be pretty good. Okay? Certainly there's going to be a very strong correlation to that. And then same thing, if someone's incline, if someone can incline 315, they can probably bench a decent amount of weight. So those two guys have what I would classify as a strong two-way street relationship. Then there's a two-way street that's kind of weak. The exercises do impact each other, but one exercise usually impacts noticeably more than the other. A good example of this, in my opinion, is bench press and push-ups. Now, push-ups do require some skill, but remember weight. You guys know how much weight you're lifting on a push-up? Okay? It's about 60% of your body weight. If you're curious, just get in push-up position, put your hands on a scale, okay, and look at it. But it's about 60%. So me as a 200-pound guy, when I'm doing push-ups, that's 120 pounds that I would be lifting when I do that. Not your full body weight, right? Because it ain't a handstand push-up. Your feet are on the ground. Now, so that means then that in terms of skill, that's about the equivalent of me benching about 120. Okay? So now most men will bench more than the standard push-ups. So in other words, like for me, I wouldn't work out with 120. It would be more than that on a barbell. And certainly in my experience, especially if you have an athlete that's not excessively heavy body weight-wise, like it doesn't carry a ton of extra fat, as long as you bench press with some frequency, you'll be good at push-ups. So bench press to push-ups, that's a strong transfer right there because the skill required to bench, particularly heavy bench, it will flow down. Now push-ups, you can get good at push-ups, and certainly push-ups will have an impact. So if you know someone can bench someone can do 60 push-ups, you know that they'll be, decent at the bench. But they may not be great. If they almost never bench, like take out someone in the military who just does a bunch of push-ups, and then all of a sudden they have to bench a lot, they'll bench more than an untrained person, but it's not going to be super excessive because they never got used to handling that super heavy weight. They don't have the skill able to balance that stuff out. So push-ups, in my opinion, have a pretty weak influence on the bench, and they are not a good way of improving the bench, particularly for men that are strong. Now, it is worth noting push-ups are a little more valuable for women because with push-ups there, you can say you got a 130-pound woman and then she's doing 60% of her weight. That's like 95 pounds. So not all females are benching that much. And in fact, maybe she's starting off with a 45, 65-pound bench press. So for her to do push-ups, that's getting her used to that heavy weight. But as this female gets more elite, same thing with a guy, push-ups are not going to become as appropriate there. So that's a weak relationship. Then there's a one-way street, exit only. What I mean by exit only, don't let your mind go there, is that the flow of skill goes just in one direction and it's out. The exercise you are doing, the one you're comparing, will improve that other exercise, but it's not a two-way street. So doing this exercise gets you better at that exercise, but then the other exercise doesn't really get you better at that one. So that happens sometimes. We'll look at a few examples there in a second. And then there's a one-way street, entrance only. Okay, and what this means is then the exercise you're looking at does not improve the other exercise, but the other exercise will improve the exercise that you are looking at. Okay? And again, let's look at some examples. So the way I like to think about this, let's have a little fun, right? And I'm a D&D kind of freak, let's go think of like a battle royale. What if you took two athletes and you said, okay, you guys are going to have a competition. In 6 months, you're going to meet, you're going to do an exercise, who can do the most, right, or 1 rep max. And then but you can only train with one exercise. So imagine like little gladiators that are going to battle it out. So let's say, for example, you're contesting a squat. So a squat is the end result. We want to squat the most we can. And you've got two athletes, let's say they're clones to keep life easy. One athlete can train as hard as he wants or she wants on a leg extension. The other athlete can do squats. That's all. Okay, so you got one person squatting, one person doing leg extension. They're going to meet and they're going to do squats. Okay, who's going to win? Well, almost for sure, I think it's pretty much common sense that the person who's squatting is going to get better at squats. Okay, and the person who does leg extension, yes, would be better at squats than had they never squatted before, but I don't really see how it's reasonable to think that the leg extension person who just trains leg extension, that's it, will have any familiarity with how to balance, how to control that weight, how to handle a bunch of weight, so they're going to get destroyed. Even if, to make it a little more fair, sometimes I like to say, well, if you have that 6-month time frame, the last month you can do whatever you want. Even if that person smashed really hard on leg extension for 5 months, then switched over just to build that basic neuromuscular coordination in a squat so they knew how to do it, they're still not nearly squatting as much, in my opinion, as the person who just does squats. Okay? So that would be an example of a one-way street where the squat improves the leg extension, but the leg extension either does not improve all by itself or when combined as a minimal improvement to the squat. In fact, I'd argue that you have a good chance that the person who squats only for 6 months, if they're willing to push hard, remember adherence and effort in our hierarchy of strength, they'll probably be able to out leg extension the person who's just done leg extension, because their squat gets so much bigger and so much stronger, right? Take someone who can squat 400 pounds, they're going to walk over and dominate that leg extension. And if that person just started out with basic leg extension, they may not have made the same progress. So that one hopefully is pretty obvious. Squats trump leg extension, and it shows the transfer of skill. Let's look at one that's a little more debatable, but I still think it's pretty clear. Leg press versus squats. So same thing, you have someone who can only leg press for 6 months, and then you have someone who can squat, and you're going to contest them on the squat. Well, again, I think the squatter is going to win. That person on leg press is probably going to get a lot stronger in terms of weight that they're lifting there. Yes, it would help their squat some, but with a squat, if you don't practice that movement, people very rarely are very successful. Okay? And once again, the squat has a great impact on the leg press. Take someone who can squat 400 pounds, and you can show them a brand new leg press they've never used before, sit them down, and guess what? They'll probably be able to do at least 600 pounds on that thing, and I find most people can, leg press double their squat. Okay? So the squat has a huge impact. The transfer of skill flows downhill. Leg press does not have a great impact on the squat when done all by itself. Now, let's flip it around, though. What about squat versus leg press? So yes, so squat helps this. So here's your one-way street exit. Okay, but the leg press doesn't. Maybe you can argue there's a weak relationship. Now, I do think it can be beneficial if you do two things at once. Okay, for this, we're doing an either-or kind of world to make life easier. But if in reality, of course, an athlete can squat and leg press. So leg press does have some unique benefits that when combined with squats may be useful. Okay. What about a Smith machine squat? Smith machine squat's cool. You can go even heavier on a Smith machine, so it has the weight thing going for it, but remember, it's missing the key element. It doesn't function in 3 dimensions. Okay, the bar can't move in any sort of plane. It doesn't require the same neuromuscular coordination. So once again, you take someone who only Smith machine squats for 6 months versus someone who barbell squats, and then they're going to battle each other out. What's going to happen? Well, the Smith machine squatter definitely is going to get better at squatting. But I think when that really heavy weight comes, they're not going to be able to balance, they're not going to be able to control. So even if they walk in, this person went from, say, 300 pounds to 400 pounds on the barbell, and this person went from 300 pounds to 500 pounds on the Smith machine, that's still no guarantee that they're going to be able to do 400 pounds on a barbell. In fact, they're going to be pretty sorely, unhappy. We already talked about push-ups and bench press. So what's going on there and how one impacts the other. Here's one that most people don't talk about, but I think is worth mentioning: squat versus deadlift. Okay, what's the transfer? Does a squat help your deadlift? My answer is for sure yes. I believe squats do help your deadlift. Squats are a great assistance exercise to get your legs strong so you have power out of the hole, whether it's a sumo or conventional, to help your back be strong. Take a decent squatter and they're going to be okay at least at deadlifting, for sure. But what if we flip it? What if you could only deadlift? Okay, I've had to do this. Right? With me, I've had a couple of bad knee issues, ironically, outside of the gym, shit that comes back and gets you. And so, there's good periods of time where I wasn't able to squat with any significant weight. But I still wanted to deadlift, and I could still go through the regular deadlift stuff. I've always been a pretty decent deadlifter. Well, I found that not being able to squat, for me, that was the worst thing that could happen, because now it was really hard to build my deadlift by just deadlifting. So I was missing my most important assistance exercise for deadlifts, which in my case was squats. But deads don't help the squat. I couldn't train deadlifts for 4 or 5 months and then just go squat it, right? You might good morning it, but you're not going to be able to squat it because you're never in that range of motion in the deadlift. And then what about lat pull down versus pull-ups? So here's another one. Which one's higher skill? Okay. Well, the pull-ups, hopefully you realize you got to control your body weight, all that kind of stuff. The pull-ups are higher skill. Take someone who's good at pull-ups and they'll be able to just walk over to a lat pull down machine and do well. Of course, a little bit of training, do even more, but they will just dominate that right from the get-go. Take someone who's been doing lat pull down, even a big old strong bodybuilder who's been doing heavy weights on lat pull down, have them walk over and just start repping out pull-ups. Doesn't usually happen. Okay, so you want to find, so the key thing is to find what works for you. Now, I do have lists on my site that I believe are what the most important exercises are for your chest, for your back, for your legs, things like that, and I'll share those links. But remember, individual variation is a factor. Okay, you have to find the exercises that work for you. Some of the big things that modify this, like your individual biomechanics and levers. I'm more built to deadlift. I have long arms and a shorter torso. Okay, that's not so great in the bench. So what works for you? Someone can't automatically just adopt my style if they're built totally different. Okay, some people just build up muscles certainly easier. For me, it was always biceps built pretty well, triceps really hard to build. I've seen some of my friends walk around with ginormous triceps, and they didn't do a whole lot for them. I felt like I trained my triceps a lot harder than they did. Okay, but for me, it was always hard to build. Then some people may look and say, "Man, why'd you get how do your biceps work that way?" Right? Although I did work on them a lot, but still, some people have natural things. And then you have some natural transfer to other activities. Some people can take this strength that they're building and transfer it over. I've got a kind of a more distant family member who doesn't really work out a whole lot. I wouldn't call the guy like super fit. But I remember once we were at a playground and he just hopped up on a bar and did one of those human flags on the side. And that's badass. I've been working out forever and I can do that, or not even nearly as well as he could, and he hardly ever worked out. So I was stronger. If you measure it by powerlifting, it wouldn't be a competition. But in that instance, he was able to take his muscles and certain parts of his core and his relative strength, and he was able to do that activity a lot better. So there is going to be certain transfer over. Some exercises transfer well to another. So my challenge to you is you have to pay attention. This is why we keep logs and records and things like that. You should know, hey, if my bench goes up 20 pounds, what else goes up? Am I expecting my incline to go up 20 pounds, 15 pounds, 10 pounds, right? Do my military press also go up, right? An easy way to see if one thing goes way up and another thing has no impact, they're not related. Right? For example, my squat went from 250 to 500, and my calves didn't change at all. Right? Calves don't have that much of an impact in there. Then my calves, I've decided to focus on them. Somebody teased me once about them being decaffeinated, and I'm a sensitive little fragile eggshell for an ego. And so I then had to train them. So I trained them a lot, and my calves put on 3 inches, and my squat basically stayed the same or went up 10 or 20 pounds from regular training. Okay, so they don't have much impact there either way. What about something like dips? Here's an interesting one. Do dips help your bench? Well, it's similar muscles. So you got your pecs, you got your front delts, you got your tris. There's a lot of logic to that. But then again, it's quite a different angle. It's quite a different position. It's a whole different plane. So what's going on there? And I think there's a lot of individual variation. For some people, the dips really seem to work and to build. But then for others, not much difference. So you pay attention. Spend 2 months making your dip really good, right? So all of a sudden you can do weighted dips or more dips. You double the number of reps. What happens to your bench? Okay, does your bench go up? Does your bench go down? Does it stay the same? And then obviously ask yourself, are there other reasons that could explain that? I'm not encouraging you not to bench at all. But let's say you did a maintenance bench press program, but you super focus on your dips. Okay, if one goes up, the other one, see what happens. For me, dips felt great, but never really seemed to do a whole lot for my bench. But that's useful to know because then I want to get them out of my program so I can put my training, energy, and resources into something else. Because if I keep dips in there and working really hard and doing weights and I got 135 and I'm repping it out, that's a lot of fatigue on other things. It makes my shoulders tired, makes my elbows tired. Now I don't have the time for that. Okay? So you have to think about what helps you and what doesn't. So look critically. Your goal should be, if something doesn't help you, get it out of the frickin' program unless it has a distinct other reason. Maybe it is keeping you healthy or something like that. So why are you doing the exercise? Do you believe it's doing what it's doing? And then if it doesn't, get it out and put in a substitute, right? Put in what focuses. And in generally, as someone climbs that level of advancement, so they go from beginner to intermediate to advanced, the things that help narrow, not broaden out. So a beginner, almost everything, right? Squatting, leg extensioning, all that stuff seems to help, right? Whatever that exercise is. So like leg press versus squats. And then as you get up, maybe for super advanced people, that leg press no longer helps. So then you have to kind of find, well, what does help? Is it now a box squat? Is it this? Is it that? Generally, the closer an exercise is, it should have more of a mimic, but that's no guarantee. Board press, for example, or the slingshot, right, on the bench press. Does it really help? Monitor. If your slingshot goes up 50 pounds and your bench doesn't change, it doesn't help. Okay? If your slingshot goes up 50 pounds and your bench goes up 50 pounds, that's an awesome relationship. And now you've discovered that, and then you want to maximize that for your training. So you as a coach, you as the lifter, you've got to find the exercises that work for you. You can only do this through trial and error, along with some reading and help from other coaches. And so my goal is to get you started on what probably works and what probably doesn't, but then you have got to determine where somebody is. Okay, and that's really important, because if we go back to that hierarchy of strength, okay, the last time we'll look at that, that exercise selection is, again, the single most powerful variable that you as a trainer or coach are going to program in. Program in the right exercises, damn, you're probably going to kick some butt. Program in the wrong exercises, now you're getting your butt kicked. Okay, so know what it is you're trying to improve, understand the relationships between those exercises, seek to really understand them deeply by studying them, and then see what happens. And once you know that, now you have a whole wealth of education and power that you can then share with other people to get them to reach their goals. So coming up next will be my 3 favorite programs, including the beginner workout that I love to put initial powerlifters on, that I've gotten awesome results with, kind of just a classic let's get ready for a competition program, and then my Sith Lord program to bring you over to the dark side. So until then, we'll see you next week.